Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
One of the great strengths of this nation has always been our ability to navigate a way to calmer waters. And yet this depends upon politicians, particularly those who stand for stability and moderation, as I do. For too long now, we've turned a blind eye as millions slid into greater insecurity. I want to say to those people, not this time.
Believe it or not, that was only 3 months ago when Keir Starmer was celebrating his massive election victory. Have things really gotten so off course since? Hello, you're listening to Bloomberg UK Politics. I'm Stephen Carroll.
And I'm James Woolcock. Well, the reason we're saying that is Keir Starmer's former Chief of Staff, Sue Gray, has resigned. Now, this matters. It matters quite a lot because she was at the core of making Starmer's plans for government a reality. It was her job to get the party ready for power. She designed the org chart. She was in charge of Keir Starmer's time and who got to speak to him. She even ran Downing Street's news agenda known as The Grid. So her ousting is an acknowledgement that Number 10's operation isn't working. And that raises questions for Starmer's top team. Crucially, can they make Downing Street work?
Well, it's a top team that looks a little bit different now. Morgan McSweeney, who's the Labour election guru, has been moved into the Chief of Staff job from his current job as Head of Political Strategy at Number 10. The Prime Minister also making some other key appointments, bolstering his communications team, hiring James Lyons as Director of Strategic Communications. He, a former journalist who went on to big jobs in communications for the NHS and for the social media platform TikTok as well. The new team doesn't have long to settle in, though. Attention counting down to the budget on the 30th of October. Officials admitting now that there are issues with 3 different tax proposals. Oh, good. Something else to worry about.
Well, let's get more now on this with our political editor, Alex Wickham, who 2 weeks ago was one of the first to write that Gray was coming under pressure to quit. Alex, why has Starmer reportedly pressured the situation to happen this way?
The way it was put to me by a senior person in Number 10 is that Keir Starmer thought in Sue Gray, when he hired her in opposition, he thought he was getting a sort of experienced pro who knew the ins and outs of the civil service, having worked in the heart of government for decades, who knew how the rules worked of public life, who got his approach to integrity and his sort of technocratic vision of managing the country, rather than a political game player who would get involved in what he considers to be sort of day-to-day nonsense. And instead, what happened is he got a Chief of Staff in Sue Gray who did embroil herself in fights with factions inside the Labour Party, who did make controversial political judgments and essentially didn't do the job that he wanted her to do. And it ultimately, very quickly into this government, made her position untenable. It is extraordinary to have to fire your Chief of Staff in this amount of time. And it will raise questions about his judgment as Prime Minister, but also whether anybody is capable of running this operation.
Yeah, I mean, lots of questions to be answered now as well. Tell us a bit about the people who are stepping into the new roles. Morgan McSweeney, we've mentioned on this programme before, a key part of the Labour election machinery. Yeah,
and I think Morgan McSweeney was in a different camp to Sue Gray. Morgan McSweeney is a true and true political advisor. His job was Labour's campaign chief. He came up with the strategy for the general election. He's in charge of political strategy now. And what he offers is the ability to sort of see round corners in terms of what could go wrong in terms of politics, which is perhaps not Keir Starmer's strong point, and perhaps it wasn't Sue Gray's strong point either. So some people in the government are today optimistic that Morgan McSweeney being in charge of the political operation makes more sense and could offer, better solutions to some of the irritating problems that Keir Starmer doesn't want to have to think about in terms of politics. He's a long-standing advisor, very close to Keir Starmer. It's fascinating that in this turf war that has taken place between Sue Gray and Morgan McSweeney over the last 3 months, rather than try to find an elegant solution where both Sue Gray was, kept happy and Morgan McSweeney was made more happy in terms of the structure of how Downing Street worked, Keir Starmer appears to have handed total power to Morgan McSweeney, completely got rid of Sue Gray. She may have been given a new job title, but it's not really a real job. And that sort of dynamic, that's total siding with Morgan McSweeney, really turns him now into a huge, both powerful figure in terms of how this country is run, but also a weather vane for any problems coming down the track.
Why has Starmer done that? What is he trying to achieve here? Like, what would it take to get this political project back on track?
I think, we can see that the first 100 days, we're not even there yet, have been very bumpy for Keir Starmer, and probably worse than anybody expected. Certainly that's what people within the government are saying. Whether it's decisions like the controversial decision to take winter fuel payment away from pensioners, whether it's things like the messaging on the doom and gloom around the fiscal situation, or whether it's things like the donation scandal that has been playing out and not going away, dogging Keir Starmer for weeks, questions over his integrity, a story that Sue Gray was at the heart of. I think what Keir Starmer wants is a reset, and he wants to be able to say, look, rather than this simmering discontent and questions over our judgment and ability to put out these fires, rather than that rumble on for a year and define my premiership, I want to nip this in the bud. And we always hear that Keir Starmer is a ruthless decision maker in terms of things like this. Well, he has acted, swiftly, relatively, to make a very tough decision to fire this person he brought in to run his government. And that will not have been easy. So it is a sign that he has recognised that his government was not working at all, and that he needed to make a very dramatic change in order to fix it, and try and do that quickly rather than let this rumble on.
We don't often spend a lot of time talking about the backroom team that run things in number 10, the notable exception being Dominic Cummings and Boris Johnson. Are we in a somehow analogous situation to that?
There's often, as you say, the vast majority of the country don't know or care who any of these people are. For a small number
It's very much the who's that rather than the who's who.
Indeed. And for a small number of people in Westminster, it is the thing that matters most, because these are the people who wield power behind the scenes. These are the people who control what the Prime Minister sees, who the Prime Minister talks to, what policy issues are on the agenda, and they crucially advise the Prime Minister, I think we should go in this direction, I think we should go in that direction. Obviously, it's up to the Prime Minister to lead his government. But we know Keir Starmer likes to delegate. So perhaps even more so for him than for some other Prime Ministers. Rishi Sunak was a micromanager by comparison. These advisors are really important. And, there will be meetings every single morning in Downing Street at 8 a.m. that Morgan McSweeney will now lead, which decide what the government is doing that day and how they're addressing problem X, Y, Z. And that is a pretty powerful role to have. So, over the next days and weeks, we will start to hear what is different about his approach. He will add a lot more politics and political thinking to the mix. I think we will see different messaging from the government now. I think we will see sort of probably clear attempts by the Prime Minister to make interventions that try and regain the initiative after what's been a pretty listless first few months that doesn't look like they have much of a plan. And crucially, coming up to that budget for Rachel Reeves in 3 weeks, which really is a make or break moment now for her as Chancellor, but also for the government in terms of giving its first impression to the public in office.
Now, you just called it quite a drastic change in the top team. On that budget that's coming, is that change in the sort of the staff possibly going to lead to changes in what's going to come in the budget? I mean, I see in Bloomberg this morning we're writing about how some of the main revenue raises that were penciled in for this budget might be being questioned.
Yeah, there is a lot of uncertainty around the budget, whereas with previous governments under the Tories, they tended to leak/brief out quite a lot of their policies and what they were thinking and what they were doing. There is a lot more uncertainty about what Rachel Reeves is going to do. There are these revenue raises on private school fees, on private equity carried interest loophole, and on non-doms that are, now under question. Those things will still raise some money, you would thought. Well, now they're being tweaked by Rachel Reeves, but they may not raise as much money as they were going to. There are direct policies that are linked to these policies, 40,000 new NHS appointments, appointments, things like this, that will need to be funded somehow by Rachel Reeves now. But more broadly, the bigger question of the £22 billion black hole that Rachel Reeves loves telling us about in-year spending, plus various questions about how she's going to loosen her fiscal rules in order to be able to borrow tens of billions of pounds more. These are questions that we still don't know the answers to. Which taxes are going to go up? Is she going to raise capital gains tax? There are a lot of big decisions to be made in this budget, any one of which could go wrong and unravel the whole thing. And that is a moment of danger for any chancellor when you're making really quite momentous decisions in a fiscal statement. And, they will be nervously poring over every single one of those decisions in the Treasury. Remember in the days of George Osborne, the omni-shambles budget, the pasty tax, all of these things that have seen chancellors come a cropper in the past. Rachel Reeves can't really afford to have one of those at this budget. And Morgan McSweeney and Rachel Reeves are very close. They will be on the same page on what they're going to do. Keir Starmer has faced some criticism for sort of outsourcing his economic policy to the Chancellor completely rather than pushing back on some of these things like the winter fuel cut. It would be really interesting to see whether number 10 can provide a check on number 11 or whether number 11 sort of leads and makes its own mistakes. That is going to be a really fascinating dynamic over the coming weeks and months.
So would you say now at this stage we're talking about being done with the behind-the-scenes battles and we now are free to focus on the big policy issues?
Yeah, well, that is what number 10 would like to think. And you speak to number 10 aides, they're genuinely quite relieved today that that Keir Starmer has taken this decision to get rid of Sue Gray. They do think that it will end some of the sort of backroom nonsense and infighting and let them focus on delivering for the country, which is what they all say they want to do. I would say, as a cynical political journalist, having seen this story before, that it's all well and good until 5 minutes down the track when somebody's got a complaint about the new Chief of Staff and the way that they run things.
All right, Alex, thanks very much for joining us, our UK political editor, Alex Wickham there. Well, that's it from us for today. If you like the programme, don't forget to subscribe and give it 5 stars so other people can find it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify or wherever you listen.
This episode was produced by Tiwa Adebayo and our audio engineer was Sean Guasamakia. I'm James Woolcock.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. We'll be back with more tomorrow. This is Bloomberg.
Bloomberg UK Politics. Listen weekdays at noon on DAB Digital Radio in London.